This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Royce DuBiner, who's a partner at McGuireWoods. He has been focusing a lot on the psychedelic space in the cannabis area and was going to give us an update on some of the trends he's watching in those areas. Royce, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do day to day, and then let's talk about some of the trends watching.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm a partner in the Chicago office of McGuireWoods, food and drug lawyer, but I also do some transactional and litigation work. And my day-to-day at the firm is either advising companies, specifically private equity firms, on the acquisition of either food or drug or medical device businesses. And I also provide regulatory guidance to our clients in industries regulated by FDA and the Federal Trade Commission, as well as working with our clients as what I like to say our fourth chair in litigation on product liability defense, either in federal or state courts, mostly class action defense.
Royce, thank you. It's been great for me to watch you build specialties, build a great expertise in the cannabis space, the psychedelic space, and so forth. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. First, what are the trends that you're watching in the psychedelic space currently, and also what are the trends you're watching in the cannabis space, and what are you most focused on and excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. I think what I'm really looking at right now is just the emergence of psychedelics, either ketamine, which is approved by FDA, or the use of psilocybin or psilocin by practitioners to treat treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and other illnesses that just don't traditionally respond well to selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors or SSRIs. We're really kind of pointing at the post-SSRI world. And the other major trend that I'm looking at is DEA's May 21st, 2024 notice of proposed rulemaking for controlled substances and specifically the rescheduling of marijuana. I think with the psychedelics first, what we're seeing is, a couple of years ago, we really saw practices mostly in the psychiatric space, but now we're starting to see it more and more with routine medical practices or standard providers of, either med spa or other services, really trying to address a critical unmet need with their patients, and that they noticed that with some patient groups, SSRIs and traditional approaches to treating really tough mental illness were just not responding well to the treatments that were out there. And we started seeing this emergence of ketamine, specifically IV drip ketamine, being used to treat patients in this space. And that's coupled with traditional psychotherapy. And, some of the challenges have been, addressing this in a way that is safe and beneficial to the patient, while also taking into account, how does this add value to the practice and what the practice is doing in terms of its overall revenue cycle. I think that we've really seen it take off, specifically IV drip ketamine, because there is an approved drug on the market. It's called Spravato, but it's pretty expensive, and some providers don't like using it because it doesn't have, in their opinion, the same therapeutic effect. And then the other thing that we've seen really emerge is the use of psilocybin, which is the primary psychoactive ingredient in, hallucinogenic species of mushrooms, and that being used more in an interesting way, which is the route that it's taking is more through the approved drug route, Schedule 1, getting the Schedule 1 licenses from DEA by providers, and have really seen an embrace by life sciences companies to begin clinical trials and begin work on this. And that's really a result of DEA's kind of more relaxed approach towards issuing Schedule 1 licenses. And we've really seen a lot of clinical trials emerge in this space with Schedule 1s and psilocybin. And some of those clinical trials can take place either in providers' offices, driving clinical research revenue, or they can be part of a ecosystem that could emerge as a result of getting the psilocybin approved. So a lot of really interesting growth this past year in both, psychedelics and in cannabis, and happy to dive more into what that looks like on the cannabis side as well.
No, thank you, Royce. And tell us for a second, on the psychedelic side, is it more likely to be all medical use, or are there going to be approvals for recreational use? What do you sort of see? How do you see this evolving? I mean, I know on the cannabis side, it started off as medical use, it has moved towards recreational use. Are there barriers, and what do you see on the psychedelic side?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm actually a founding member of the Psychedelic Bar Association. So, I was actually on a call yesterday with a group of legal practitioners across the country that we're debating kind of this and advance of publishing a white paper on where we think model regulations could head. But I think we're going to see growth in a couple areas. I think one, we may see additional religious use for Native American tribes or recognized religious institutions. We definitely saw that with the Church of the Eagle and the Condor case. We've also seen legalization emerge in Oregon and Colorado. And I think I wouldn't necessarily call it full-blown recreational, but what we've seen is kind of this two-pronged approach of decriminalization, but then establishing a means to obtain it through sort of a medical structure. But I think medical is going to take off, and I think it's going to take off in a way that's a little bit different than cannabis, in that what we have seen, and you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and just search this, is just an extreme explosion of clinical research in the psilocybin space through DEA Schedule I licenses being issued more rapidly to either clinical research organizations, investigators, and sponsors of these drugs. And that kind of excites me because we've always had this ability to do that through cannabis. And it's not to say that, there aren't any cannabis clinical trials out there. But my inclination is that we saw kind of the way cannabis went on the medical side and on the recreational side, and the difficulty with securing funding there. And I think on the psilocybin side, the goal of drug companies is to kind of model the Epidiolex model, which is we do the study under a Schedule I license, and then we find a currently accepted medical use and get a rescheduling by DEA to Schedule II or Schedule III.
Thank you very, very much. So there's a lot of investment. That's fast. There's more biotech and other investment in the psychedelic space than maybe in the cannabis space. That's sort of fascinating to understand. And then on the recreational side, more of a question. I take it if some of the tribes are able to use it for religious use, we're not yet seeing a parade of people wanting to join Indian tribes just so they could try psychedelics for religious reasons. We're not seeing that, right?
Unfortunately, or fortunately, we're not. It depends on your view, but I think we saw one of the big limiting factors on that is just the difficulty of getting recognized as a religious organization or Native American tribe that has that ability to use it. And we actually saw a case recently, a jury verdict return in Southern Florida, in the Quest case, which is, unfortunately, a young individual joined a unrecognized religious organization, ingested psychedelics along with another substance that may or may not have been poisoned, but resulted in their death. Wrongful death action was brought in Florida against the organization, and jury returned a pretty sizable verdict in favor of the plaintiff and against the religious organization. So that happened very recently, and it's kind of what a lot of practitioners in this space have been talking about, which is, you know, what are the risks here? What are the things we need to consider? And, you know, we have a foundational bad facts case out there that other plaintiffs' lawyers may start looking towards and replicate.
So the story is, don't game the religious exception. Got that.
Yeah.
What advice?
Absolutely.
People that are investing in the psychedelic space, looking at the psychedelic space, I mean, all of a sudden I'm seeing lots of different venture capital interests, family office interests. Any advice that you would give to people looking at the space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really important things to think about. I think it's first, you know, decide what your model is going to be at all times. It should probably be looking at a model that either invests in the pharma services side of it under a Schedule I, which is, are you growing, are you manufacturing the psychedelic? I think the second sort of thing to look at is if you are backing or looking at supporting or backing a you know, sponsor or drug company that is in the psychedelic space, to make sure that they have a game plan to go to market, which is they've got the trials lined up, they've got the funding lined up to do the trials, that their drug is going to show efficacy. And as my colleague Merritt Westcott in our Houston office would say, you know, check the IP and make sure that the IP is good. If you're more on the provider focused side, as part of a, you know, an investor that is interested in investing in either physicians' practices or other healthcare service organizations, you know, think about, you know, the fact that this could be a real revenue driver if you've got clinical research going on at your practice, and, you know, really look at, you know, what is the patient base? What is the experience of my investigators? You know, does everyone have a Schedule I license? And, you know, long term, once these drugs get approved, how do I incorporate that into my treatment model? And is there a way to turn this into sort of a service that is really easy for the patient to use and also, you know, can drive growth and revenue for my investment?
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it, Royce. Royce, what a pleasure to visit with you, and what an interesting space this is. Again, Royce DuBiner, partner at McGuireWoods, a sort of brilliant thought leader in the cannabis and psychedelic space. Royce, thank you for joining us on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast.
Thanks, Scott. Real pleasure, man.